The house looked alive from the outside, all glass and stone and warm lights glowing behind tall windows, but inside it felt like a museum after closing hours. Every sound echoed too much. Every footstep felt like it didn't belong. The boy noticed that immediately when he stepped in behind his mother, his sneakers barely making noise on the polished floor. He tightened his grip on the straps of his worn backpack, eyes darting around, careful not to touch anything. His mother walked a step ahead of him, shoulders straight but tense, wearing the uniform she had ironed twice that morning. She moved like someone who had learned how to take up as little space as possible, even in a house that could swallow 10 families whole. She gave him a quick look over her shoulder, not unkind, just cautious. "Stay where I can see you," she whispered. "Finish your homework. Don't wander." He nodded quickly. He always nodded quickly. This wasn't the first time he had come here after school, but it never got easier. The air smelled different, cleaner, sharper, like money and silence mixed together. He sat on the edge of a leather sofa that looked too expensive to be used, pulled his notebook from his bag, and tried to focus on his math problems. The numbers blurred. His ears stayed alert. Voices drifted in from the kitchen. At first they were low, casual, the way adults talked when they thought children weren't listening. Then one voice sharpened, laughter cutting through the quiet like a blade. "You really bring him here every day?" someone said. "This place isn't a daycare." Another voice scoffed. "Kids like that, you never know. Curious hands. Especially in a house like this." The boy's pencil paused midair. His mother said nothing. He could picture her face without seeing it, eyes lowered, jaw tight, swallowing words she didn't have permission to speak. He had seen that look before. At school. On buses. In stores where security guards followed them down every aisle. He stared at the numbers on the page, but they no longer made sense. What did kids like that even mean? He wanted to ask, but he already knew the answer. A door opened somewhere down the hall. Footsteps approached, heavier than the others, slower, deliberate. The laughter died instantly. The air changed. The boy had only seen the man who owned the house a handful of times. Always from a distance. Always surrounded by quiet respect that felt almost like fear. Tall. Pale. Eyes that seemed to weigh people without saying a word. He walked with the careful stiffness of someone still recovering from something unseen. The footsteps stopped. The voices softened into politeness. "Sir," someone said. "We didn't realize." "It's fine," the man replied. His voice was calm, low, carrying the kind of authority that didn't need to be raised. "Leave us." The kitchen emptied quickly. The boy kept his head down, heart thudding, suddenly aware of how small he was in this massive room. He felt exposed, like the house itself could see him. He waited for his mother to call him, to apologize for him existing in the wrong place. Instead, nothing happened. Minutes passed. Then more. Finally, his mother returned, her face unreadable. "He's resting," she said quietly. "We'll be leaving soon." The boy nodded again, relief and confusion mixing in his chest. Down the hall, behind a door that cost more than most houses, the man lay on his bed staring at the ceiling. He hadn't meant to hear the comment. Or maybe part of him had. When you owned everything, people forgot you could still listen. The words echoed in his head, sharper than any insult ever thrown his way. Kids like that. He had heard similar phrases his whole life, just dressed differently. Poor assumptions. Convenient judgments. He had learned early how rarely people were honest when power was present. The machines beside his bed hummed softly, monitoring a heart that had betrayed him once already. He closed his eyes, not from exhaustion, but from thought. A test formed in his mind. Simple. Quiet. Telling. He instructed the staff that he was sleeping and not to be disturbed. He even let his breathing slow, his body relax, slipping easily into stillness. It wasn't hard. Years of control had taught him how to appear vulnerable without ever being so. Out in the living area, the boy packed up his things when his mother went back to work. He finished his homework early, double-checking every answer. He hated mistakes. Mistakes were invitations for people to look closer, judge harder. He waited. Time dragged. The house grew even quieter. Then he noticed it. A faint buzzing sound, barely audible, coming from somewhere down the hall. At first he thought it was his imagination. He listened again. There it was, irregular, wrong. It made his stomach tighten. He recognized that sound. He stood slowly, glancing toward the kitchen, then toward the hallway. He knew the rule. Don't wander. Don't touch. Don't go where you're not invited. But he also knew that sound. He had learned early how to fix things. Old radios salvaged from trash. Broken fans. A donated computer that barely worked until he took it apart piece by piece. When you didn't have money, you learned how to make what you had last. He took a step forward, then stopped. He thought of the laughter. The words. Kids like that. His jaw tightened. He walked down the hall, footsteps careful, almost apologetic. The buzzing grew louder as he approached the door. He hesitated, hand hovering over the handle. What if he got caught? What if they were right about him? He swallowed and pushed the door open just enough to peek inside. The man lay motionless on the bed, eyes closed, chest rising and falling evenly. Machines stood beside him, lights blinking softly. One cable vibrated faintly, loose against the metal frame. The boy stepped inside, heart pounding so loudly he was sure it would wake the man. He moved closer, every instinct screaming to turn back. He set his backpack down gently, as if sound itself could get him in trouble. He leaned in, examining the machine, his eyes sharp and focused now, fear replaced by concentration. He didn't see a billionaire. He didn't see power. He saw a problem. And behind closed eyes, perfectly still, the man felt everything. The change in air. The presence. The sound of a zipper. His mind raced with assumptions he hated himself for having. He waited for the telltale signs, rustling, curiosity, greed. Instead, the buzzing stopped. The man's fingers twitched almost imperceptibly. The boy exhaled softly, relief flooding his face. He reached into his backpack again, pulling out a folded piece of paper, smoothing it with care. He placed it on the nightstand, right beside an envelope filled with cash that remained untouched. "I'm sorry," the boy whispered, not knowing the man could hear every word. "They think bad things about us." The man's heart pounded. The boy backed away slowly, eyes lingering for just a second, then turned toward the door. As he left the room, the man lay frozen, eyes still closed, mind racing. The test had begun. And nothing would ever be the same again. The boy didn't stop walking until he reached the living room, and even then, his hands were shaking. He sat back down on the edge of the sofa, backpack at his feet, and stared straight ahead as if nothing had happened. His heart was still racing, thudding so hard he worried someone might hear it. He told himself to breathe normally, to look normal, to be invisible again. From down the hall, no sound came. No shout. No footsteps. No alarm. That almost made it worse. He replayed the moment in his head again and again. Had the man really been asleep? Had his eyes moved? Had he imagined the slight tightening of the jaw, the way the breathing seemed to pause for just a fraction of a second? He couldn't be sure. He only knew the buzzing had stopped, and that felt like the right outcome. Still, a knot of fear settled in his stomach. In the kitchen, his mother scrubbed a spotless counter for the third time. Her movements were precise, controlled, but her thoughts were anything but calm. She had felt the shift earlier, the way the laughter had died too suddenly, the way the room had gone cold. She had spent years learning how to read danger in small things, in tone, in silence, in glances that lingered too long. She glanced toward the living room and didn't see her son where she had left him. Her breath caught. She dried her hands quickly and stepped out, scanning the space until she spotted him sitting stiffly on the sofa. Relief washed over her, sharp and dizzying. "You didn't move," she said softly, more a question than a statement. He nodded. He didn't trust his voice. She studied his face, seeing something new there. Not guilt. Not mischief. Something heavier. Something older than it should be on a child. Before she could ask, footsteps echoed again. The same slow, deliberate rhythm as before. Everyone froze. A staff member appeared first, clearing his throat. "He's awake," he announced, eyes flicking between mother and son. "He wants everyone in the main room." The boy's stomach dropped. The walk felt endless. The house seemed to stretch, the ceilings rising higher with every step, the walls pressing in at the same time. The boy stayed close to his mother, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder, as if to anchor him to the world. The man sat in a high-backed chair near the window, sunlight framing him like a spotlight. His face was calm, unreadable, but his eyes were sharp now, alert. Very awake. The boy felt them on him immediately. "You," the man said quietly. The word landed like a weight. "Yes, sir," the boy replied, voice steady only because he forced it to be. "Come closer." The room seemed to hold its breath as the boy stepped forward. He felt every gaze on his back, some curious, some suspicious, some already convinced of something he hadn't done. He stopped a few feet away, hands clasped in front of him, eyes lowered respectfully. "Do you know why you're here?" the man asked. The boy swallowed. "No, sir." The man leaned back slightly, studying him. "You heard something earlier. In the kitchen." The boy's fingers curled. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir." "And what did you think?" The question caught him off guard. Adults rarely asked what he thought. They usually assumed they already knew. "I thought they were wrong," he said quietly. A murmur rippled through the room. The man raised a hand, silencing it. His gaze never left the boy. "Wrong how?" The boy took a breath. "About me. About my mom." Silence fell again, heavier this time. The man's eyes flicked briefly to the staff lining the walls, then back to the boy. "And yet," he said, "you went somewhere you weren't told to go." The boy's heart sank. So he had known. "Yes, sir," he admitted. "I'm sorry. Why did you do it?" The boy lifted his eyes then, just enough to meet the man's gaze. There was fear there, yes, but also something else. Conviction. "Because something was wrong," he said. "And I knew how to fix it." The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Around them, tension thickened. A few staff members exchanged looks. One crossed his arms, lips pressed in, clearly unimpressed. "You expect us to believe," someone muttered, not quite under their breath, "that a kid just wandered into a private room out of the goodness of his heart?" The boy flinched. The man turned slowly toward the speaker. "Do you?" The staff member hesitated. "Sir, with respect." "With respect," the man cut in calmly. "You will not finish that sentence." The room went very still. The man looked back at the boy. "What did you fix?" The boy hesitated, then described it. The loose cable. The vibration. The risk it posed if it failed completely. He spoke carefully, using simple words, but the knowledge behind them was precise. As he talked, the man's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in concentration. When the boy finished, the man nodded once. "That buzzing," he said, almost to himself. "The technician said it was nothing." "It wasn't," the boy replied before he could stop himself. His cheeks flushed. "Sir?" A long pause followed. Then the man did something no one expected. He smiled. Just slightly. Not the polite curve people use for cameras, but something genuine, almost surprised. "Leave us," he said to the room. There was hesitation, then movement. Staff filed out reluctantly, curiosity burning in their expressions. The door closed, leaving only the man, the woman, and her son. The mother stepped forward instinctively. "Sir," she began, voice trembling. "If he did something wrong, punish me, not him. I told him to stay." "He did nothing wrong," the man said. She froze. "He did something brave," the man continued. "And kind. In a house where people assumed the worst of him without knowing him at all." Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. The man turned to the boy again. You were tested today. The boy frowned slightly. Tested? Yes, the man said softly. By people who thought power reveals character. He leaned forward. But character reveals itself. The boy didn't fully understand, but he felt the weight of the words settle somewhere deep inside him. Outside the room, behind closed doors, whispers had already begun. Stories twisted, assumptions reshaped, prejudice looking for new ground to stand on. Some were uncomfortable. Others were defensive. Inside, something else was happening. Something that would not stay quiet for long. The man glanced at the paper on the side table, the folded note the boy had left behind. He hadn't mentioned it yet. He would. When the time was right. For now, he wanted them to sit in the moment, to feel the tension stretch, unresolved. Because the test wasn't over. It was escalating. And everyone in that house was still being watched. The man waited until the door had fully closed and the echoes of footsteps faded down the hallway. Only then did he stand. The movement was slow, deliberate, not because his body demanded it, but because he wanted them to feel the shift. Power, when used quietly, carried farther. The boy watched him carefully. Up close, the man seemed larger than before, not just in height, but in presence. His eyes were sharp, observant, the kind that missed nothing and forgot even less. The boy straightened instinctively, as if standing taller might somehow protect him. You're not afraid, the man said, more an observation than a question. The boy hesitated. I am, he admitted. But not for the reason they think. The man's brow lifted slightly. And what reason is that? The boy glanced at his mother, then back at the man. I'm afraid of being quiet when something's wrong. The words landed harder than anyone expected. The man felt something tighten in his chest, a sensation he hadn't known for years. Not pain. Recognition. He walked to the window, looking out over the sprawling grounds, manicured lawns stretching endlessly, fountains frozen mid-spray. Do you know, he said slowly, how many people walk through this house every week? The boy shook his head. Hundreds, the man continued. Executives. Doctors. Lawyers. Technicians. People with degrees stacked like trophies. He turned back. Not one of them noticed that machine. The boy said nothing. Or maybe they noticed. The man corrected himself. And decided it wasn't their problem. He walked closer now, stopping just a step away. How did you learn to fix things like that? The boy swallowed. This was the question he hadn't prepared for. My dad, he said quietly. The mother's breath hitched. He's not around anymore. The boy added quickly, as if to fill the silence before it grew heavy. But when he was, things broke a lot. We didn't have money to replace them. So he taught me how to listen to machines. He said everything talks if you pay attention. The man closed his eyes briefly. Listening. He had spent his life surrounded by noise, markets, negotiations, praise, criticism, and yet the most important truths had always whispered. The boy continued, emboldened now. He said people are the same. The man opened his eyes again. And what did he say about people? The boy met his gaze steady. That the loud ones are usually hiding something. And the quiet ones are usually carrying everything. Something shifted in the room. The man turned away abruptly, walking back toward the bed. He picked up the folded paper from the nightstand, holding it between two fingers. You left this. The boy's face flushed. I didn't mean to. You apologized, the man said. Why? The boy's voice dropped. Because no matter what I do, people already decided who I am. Sometimes I feel like I have to say sorry just for being there. The words cut deeper than any accusation ever had. The man sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders slumping slightly, as if the weight of the world had finally found a place to rest. When I was younger, he said quietly, people decided who I was too. Not because of how I looked. Because of where I came from. The boy looked surprised. I was poor, the man continued. So poor that when people see my life now, they think I'm lying. He gave a humorless smile. They assume success erases memory. It doesn't. He looked up at the boy. It sharpens it. The mother watched silently, tears slipping down her cheeks without sound. She had worked in many houses. She had seen kindness before, even generosity. But this was different. This was recognition. The man stood again. You didn't know I was pretending to sleep? No, sir. And if I hadn't been? The boy answered without hesitation. I would have still fixed it. Even if you got in trouble? Yes, sir. Even if everyone believed the worst about you. The boy's jaw tightened. They already do. The room fell silent. The man nodded slowly. Then this is the moment. The boy frowned. Moment for what? For truth, the man said. He pressed a button on the wall. Moments later, the door opened and staff members re-entered cautiously, sensing something had changed but unsure what. The man remained standing, positioned between them and the boy, a subtle barrier that spoke volumes. I want you all to look carefully, he said, at this child. The room shifted uncomfortably. He entered my room, the man continued, without permission. He touched my medical equipment. He could have done real harm. A few people nodded, relief flickering across their faces, as if justice was finally arriving in a familiar shape. He could have, the man agreed. But he didn't. He turned sharply. He fixed a problem that professionals dismissed. He left money untouched. He apologized for prejudice he did not create. Silence thickened. Now I want to ask you something, the man said calmly. How many of you noticed the buzzing machine? No one spoke. How many of you heard the comment in the kitchen? Several heads dropped. How many of you said nothing? The room felt smaller. You thought you were judging a child, the man said. But you were being judged. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the staff. The boy stood frozen, heart pounding, suddenly aware that everything he had done, every quiet choice, had led to this moment. He hadn't meant to expose anyone. He had only meant to help. The man's voice softened slightly. Power doesn't come from money. It comes from responsibility. He turned to the boy. You have it. The boy's eyes widened. Sir, I didn't. I know, the man said gently. That's why it matters. He faced the room again. This child will be offered opportunities you never thought to give him. Education. Resources. Protection. A murmur rose, a mix of surprise and unease. And anyone who has a problem with that, the man added, eyes hardening, will find another place to work. The silence that followed was absolute. The boy felt dizzy, overwhelmed, caught between disbelief and fear. His mother reached for his hand, gripping it tightly, grounding him. The man looked down at them both. This isn't charity, he said. It's correction. He paused, letting the words settle. There are people who build walls to protect their wealth, he continued. And there are people who build bridges because they remember what it's like to be locked out. He glanced once more at the boy. You reminded me. The staff began to disperse slowly, subdued, their earlier confidence stripped away. Conversations would follow. Justifications. Regrets. But none of it could undo what had been revealed. When they were alone again, the boy finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Am I in trouble? The man smiled softly. No, he said. You ended it. The boy didn't understand yet, not fully, but he felt something warm bloom in his chest. A sense that the world, for once, had shifted in the right direction. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the grounds. Inside the house, the final stage of the test waited. And its outcome would change more than one life forever. The evening settled over the house slowly, like a held breath finally released. Light faded through the tall windows, turning the polished floors into dark mirrors. The boy sat beside his mother on a long couch that suddenly felt less hostile, though either of them spoke. Words felt fragile now. Too important to waste. Across the room, the man stood at his desk, staring down at documents that had nothing to do with contracts or markets. His thoughts moved differently tonight. Slower. Deeper. He had built an empire by predicting outcomes, by testing systems until they revealed their flaws. Yet this test, this one, had unraveled something far older than money. He turned and looked at the boy again. Really looked. "You don't know what happens next," he said quietly. The boy shook his head. "No, sir." "That's fair," the man replied. "Most people don't, even when they think they do." He walked closer, stopping at a respectful distance. "What you did today didn't just fix a machine. It exposed a pattern." The boy frowned slightly, trying to follow. "A pattern where comfort blinds people," the man continued. "Where assumptions replace responsibility." He glanced at the mother. "And where silence becomes survival." She lowered her eyes, the truth of that statement cutting closer than anything else that had been said all day. The man exhaled slowly. "I built this place to feel safe," he said. "Turns out, safety without accountability is just another illusion." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a thin folder. Inside were papers already prepared, not hastily, not impulsively. Intentional. Thought through. "I don't make offers lightly," he said, handing the folder to the mother. "This isn't pity. It's investment." Her hands trembled as she opened it. Her eyes widened. She pressed her lips together, trying to hold herself together, but the emotions surged too fast. Tears spilled freely now. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You already did," the man replied, looking at her son. "You raised someone who chooses right even when no one is watching." The boy stared at the folder, then back at the man. "Is my mom going to lose her job?" The question sliced through the air. The man's expression softened. "No," he said firmly. "She's going to gain respect." He straightened. "Effective immediately, policies in this house change. Not on paper. In practice." Later that night, the staff gathered again. This time there were no whispers. No sideways glances. Only tension, thick and unavoidable. The man stood at the front, posture calm, voice steady. "Earlier today, I pretended to sleep," he said. "Because I wanted to see who people are when power looks away." A few faces flushed. "I saw courage from the place you least expected it," he continued. "And cowardice where authority should have lived." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "There will be consequences," he said. "Not dramatic ones. Corrective ones." He paused. "Some of you will attend training you never thought you needed. Some of you will apologize. Some of you will leave." A ripple moved through the room. "Because dignity is not optional here," he finished. "It's required." No one argued. When the room cleared, the house felt different. Lighter. Not because it was suddenly kind, but because it was finally honest. Later, in the quiet of the guest room prepared for them, the boys sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the unfamiliar surroundings. Everything felt unreal. Too soft. Too clean. Too safe. His mother sat beside him, taking his hands in hers. "You were brave today," she said. He shook his head. "I was scared." She smiled gently. "Bravery usually is." He hesitated. "Did I do something wrong?" She pulled him into a tight hug. "No," she said into his hair. "You did something right when it was easier to do nothing." Down the hall, the man stood alone again, looking at the night sky. He thought about the boy's words. About being afraid of staying quiet when something was wrong. He had stayed quiet once. Long ago. When speaking up would have cost him comfort. He had chosen silence. He had won, and lost something in the process. Tonight felt like a correction. The next morning, sunlight poured into the house as if nothing had happened. But everything had. The boy walked through the hallway again, this time not shrinking, not apologizing with his posture. People greeted him. Some awkwardly. Some sincerely. All carefully. At breakfast, the man sat across from him, sipping coffee. Do you know what the hardest thing about success is? He asked. The boy thought. People think you don't remember how it feels to be small? The man smiled slowly. Exactly. He slid a small device across the table. I want you to keep fixing things, he said. Not because you have to. Because you can. The boy looked at it, then back up. What if I mess up? Then you learn, the man replied. That's how progress works. A pause followed. You froze when I did that, the boy said suddenly. The man raised an eyebrow. When you fixed the machine? Yes, the boy said. You almost moved. The man chuckled softly. You caught that? The boy nodded. Machines tell the truth. People try not to. The man laughed then, genuinely. You're going to be dangerous, he said. In the best way. Weeks later, the story spread, but not as gossip. As change. Policies shifted. People adjusted. Some resisted and left. Others stayed and learned. The house no longer ran on fear disguised as professionalism. It ran on awareness. The boy started school in a place his mother had only ever seen in brochures. He struggled at first, not with work, but with belonging. But he remembered the quiet moment in the bedroom. The buzzing machine. The choice. And when he saw something wrong, he spoke. Years later, when the man lay in a hospital bed again, this time truly asleep, the boy sat nearby, older now, steadier. He watched the machines, listened carefully, and smiled when everything hummed just right. The test had never been about trust. It had been about character. And the one who passed it best had never needed to pretend.